Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter. Television idents are dying out. At least, the artistry and creativity behind them most certainly is. These little sequences have been a mainstay of British telly since the early 1950s, letting audiences know both what channel they're currently tuned into, but also helping to form a connection. A link that sparked within the viewer, prompting a certain reaction when viewing said ident. Whether that reaction be one of comfort, of excitement, intrigue, or even contempt in the worst case, television idents seem like that one solid constant. An ever-changing constant in appearance and sound, but one that remained recognisable, a cornerstone of the television viewing experience. It's fair to say that television as a whole has changed remarkably over the last 70 years, to a state where the traditional way of watching programmes is rapidly dwindling. Everything changes or evolves, but I believe the humble television ident, while still as prevalent as it ever was, is in something of a crisis. But to understand that and how we got there, let's take a brief look at how it grew in the golden age of television. The first majorly recognisable ident surely must go to the BBC Batwings, that were first seen in 1953. Whilst made up of a rather complex model, the strange symbol was unique, one that viewers could connect with the corporation outside of just looking at the three letters dotted at the bottom of the screen. Some people feared the Batwings, some people hated it, but it's gone on to form an important piece of televisual design and identity. ITV, the BBC's main competitor, seemingly understood the importance of a strong symbol also, as the various regional companies that made up the network would all experiment with their own distinctive logo in their early days, some of them sticking around for decades, others being swapped out after a matter of years. Whilst these designs were remarkably simple, like the Batwings, they formed connections with viewers. Millions who were adopting television for the first time were drawn to these symbols that represented the broadcasting industry. Since it was the first, let's initially focus on BBC One, or just BBC TV as it was known to begin with. In the early 1960s, the BBC introduced a globe motif for its flagship channel. Not only does the design communicate that the BBC is serving a global purpose, but it's a universally recognisable symbol, one that when displayed on television carried a sense of importance and sophistication. The globe would remain a constant staple on BBC TV, later renamed to BBC One, for the next 30 years. It survived the jump to colour, and even embraced the new technologies of computer-generated imagery. But despite its variation, the globe had become synonymous with BBC One, and arguably BBC TV as a whole. Audiences, whether they had first seen television in the 60s, 70s or 80s, would come to connect the spinning sphere to the BBC's flagship channel, creating that association, one that has gone on to remain strong long after the symbol's eventual retirement. 1997 saw the globe remain in a more subtle way, now plastered onto a balloon that floated across various UK landscapes. It wouldn't be until the rhythm and movement era began in 2002 that the globe would be seen completely absent for the first time in nearly 4 decades. Now, you may think, hang on, if the globe identity was so strong, so recognisable and so prevailing for millions of Brits up and down the country, changing it would surely spell disaster, right? Well, yes and no. It's true that upon their release, many didn't take to the rhythm and movement set, and whilst that criticism has cooled down over the last 20 years, there are many who see this as the beginning of the end for BBC One's identity. Now, I disagree with this doomsday view. I think change is inherently good, even if it's a big breakaway from what's come before, and the rhythm and movement idents certainly reflect that. What I personally think salvages them for the most part is how creative they choose to be. Not all of them are winners, I've talked about that at length with this set, but the ones that work really do work wonders. And no, trust me, this isn't just nostalgia talking. When they were eventually swapped out for the Circles brand in 2006, we see an interesting blend of the old and the new. Whilst no globe is present, the mere presence and focus on a circle motif clearly harks back to the days of 4:3, with the circle finishing as the centre point of every sequence. The scenarios that played around it ranged massively. Some were really inspired, original, unique and fun, and others just felt a bit dull or, moreover, like a waste of time. But it's fair to say that the circles were received much more positively than rhythm and movement was. Perhaps the shift of a focus to a circle shape, echoing the globe, re-sparked some of those connections for older viewers, giving them vague glimpses and memories of the good old days. Tons of variations would come over the next 10 years, continuing to bolster that as the oldest TV channel in the UK, BBC One still had reams of creativity left to showcase when it came to its on-screen identity. When the Oneness brand took over in 2017, This marked what many see as the lowest point for the channel. Gone were the circles and the scenarios that came with them, in were groups of people doing all sorts of things, often awkwardly stopping and staring directly into the camera to haunt your dreams. Whilst the concept of people coming together as one, or oneness, or whatever, was a valiant one, it didn't really seem to translate well to the format of a TV ident. Furthermore, the absence again of some kind of globe or central shape was noticeable, which, let's face it, as much as it shouldn't matter, probably made the negative reaction that little bit more fiery. But a few years later, in 2022, we were treated to the lens branding, which at the time of this recording is the current model used by BBC One. Now, these guys are a mixed bag, like many of their predecessors, but they once again bring out a central shape, a circle acting as a lens into another scenario. And whilst a globe it ain't, it does hark back to it, and even the circle's idents too. So you may ask, Adam, you're lauding praise on this channel still showing creativeness with their idents, so what's the problem? Well, whilst the lens branding is creative in some aspects, I think it marks a simplification that we're seeing broadly across television. Most businesses, brands or corporations are moving towards a simpler model. Simpler logos, simpler everything, nothing is safe. But even though there are plenty of lens sequences I like, what do these really tell you about the channel? What connection do they make with you? Looking back at the idents of old, whilst they were arguably even simpler, partly because they had no choice, they had to, and remain, a strong identifier. They had to be, and remain so, a strong identifier, communicating feelings of sophistication and importance amongst other things. Not that you can't swing in the other direction to let go and be a bit more free, but if that connection isn't solidly established, then you may ask, what's the point? This isn't just limited to BBC One, this is endemic throughout nearly all television channels in the UK. More and more as the years go by, we see idents treated as some kind of afterthought, something that broadcasters have to include, but don't necessarily take as much time or effort in how they want to present them. This did happen in the 20th century too. I mean, look at BBC Two as a prime example. For the latter half of the 80s, this was BBC Two's main ident and look. It's dull, it's drab, it doesn't really tell you anything, it's a complete dud. But then in 1991, when they were completely overhauled and replaced with the twos we all know and love today, that completely reshaped the image of the channel. It reconfigured the connection. Audiences now had a different view of BBC Two, one that was complemented with a long list of different variations, the vast majority of them clear in what they are trying to get across, whilst being hugely memorable in their own right. They were so strong, they were even brought back into rotation for a stint in the 2010s. If then 20-year-old idents were being used to represent the channel as opposed to something new, what does that tell you? To be fair to BBC Two, ever since they brought in the curve idents in 2018, I've largely viewed them as a success. They're fun, simple, and each can communicate a different mood or style depending on the upcoming programme, whilst also highlighting the range that BBC Two has to offer. Channel 4 is another great example of an outlier. The idents they introduced in 2023 showcase just how much impact you can make when you inject effort, thought, and a healthy splash of creativity. The forever moving sequence with the 4 symbol as its centre is a fantastic idea. It truly shows off many different aspects of UK life in a variety of different techniques and approaches. Some have asked, why keep the 4 symbol at the heart of it? Well, this is the 4 symbol the channel launched with in 1982, and this is the 4 symbol now over 40 years later. It's practically the same. Groundbreaking back in its day, viewers instantly connected with the blocky logo that hit their screens, so much so that it's been a part of all the channel's major ident looks over the last 4 decades. A fantastic example of being able to utilise your logo in a set of fresh new idents that doesn't feel lazy or slapped together. Now, to give credit to some of the more niche or smaller channels out there, I know many are simply not going to have the same budget levels compared to the big boys of broadcasting. But that as may be, with the technology available now, there are immense possibilities that can be created, compared to what we actually get, which makes me think more and more that it's not a question of money, it's a question of effort. Channel 5, one of the biggest channels in the UK, has been operating these as their main idents for several years now. What does this tell you about the channel? Absolutely nothing. That's just my view, of course, but how disappointing that a channel with such stature can produce something this low effort. Another looming threat is the growing use and prevalence of AI when it comes to art. And sure, when given the right prompts, it can come up with some truly amazing vistas, but then on the other hand, you get the stuff you see promoting the Willy Wonka experience. I don't know if any AI is or has been used for any idents that you see on screen currently, but as the technology develops and becomes more sophisticated, it does make me wonder if we'll eventually see it seep into the television medium. This would be a great shame for the art of making idents, countless designers and graphics people would most likely be put out of a job, making finding work increasingly difficult in an already difficult space. Yes, most idents these days are made by using computers, but there are still some that use model work, or shooting out in the open, giving creatives the chance to show their style, or make their mark, on some of the UK's most recognisable TV channels. Overall, you may think that my view here is one of doom and gloom, and rest assured, idents are still very much a part of television, and hopefully will continue to be so for many years to come. But the issue I'm getting at is that we seem to be swapping out creating original, bold or iconic designs and concepts to going with generic cookie-cutter sequences that you could swap out one channel's logo for another and it would fit just as easily. Ident should be something the viewer can take note of, be engaged to view and form that connection with the associated channel, just as viewers did back in the days of analogue. But more and more, idents are increasingly treated like, and as such are viewed, as an afterthought, something produced more as an obligation rather than something to be treated with pride. After all, these are meant to represent the channel as a whole, to give you a sense of their identity, their personality. But more and more, we've seen that ethos ebb away. With streaming services booming and taking more and more viewership, you'd notice outside of a few seconds of a sting at the beginning of the programme, they don't have idents in the traditional sense, and to be fair, they don't need them. But television does need them, and even though their roots stem as far back as the 1950s, they're an idea that I truly believe can work in the modern day, given the appropriate amount of time, effort and artistic freedom that have helped so many of them work into our collective cultural memory. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, let me know your thoughts on all this down below, and subscribe to the channel as well. We'd love to have you aboard. In the meantime, I've been Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and a special thank you to Macra, Ethan Carberry-Holt, Bruce Danton, Globe of Reviews, Derek Chambers, Shaun Knock, Dord Khan, Liam Domain, Trev Hughes, AJ Mac 200017, Deck KP20, Simon Harrison, Evan Hart 38, and Jen, our AMTV staff members.